I'm sorry, I got carried away talking up here. You know, Fran just gets me going. She asked me a question about, she was asking me about punk rock, so I was telling her about it.
She's a punk rocker.
Yeah. How's everybody doing? As you know, this is the last class till the 13th of March. 13th of March. I found out today that on the 6th of January, they're doing for the high school group Tim Ayers Jeopardy. And they're having a whole bunch of Bible questions on the thing, but then they have a category, Tim Ayers for 100, Tim Ayers' life for 200, Tim Ayers for 300. And I said, that's pretty dangerous, you know. It's like, because I'm old enough to have a history. So we'll see. But I thought that was funny that they see me as celebrity worthy. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, I hope that works. So if you see a mushroom cloud over the Grace Church the 6th of January, you know that something went terribly wrong. Let's see. Oh, I want to tell you this, that I found out yesterday morning that for the last month I've been preparing the wrong sermon for this weekend, so I'm preparing. I was supposed to be preaching on the Son of God, and I thought I was preaching on the Son of Man, and let me just tell you, those are two very different things, so if you think to pray for me, I wrote a new sermon yesterday. It's one of those times where you just dig into your deep well, and they're only 10 minutes long, you know, because there are three of us. So it's with the ladies, me and Maren and Amy. So let's see. I don't know that I have anything else to tell you. I don't know. I can't think of anything. Everything's going well. It's pretty well. So that's a good thing. Usually, I have to say this, most churches, when it comes to December, everybody's just scared to death that the giving in December will not make it so you can live the rest of the year. And we're not having that problem at all. So, amen. What a blessing. I can't remember the last time in December that I wasn't having to monitor it's something on the website that we can go to and watch in real time the money come in. So I forget what that's called. Anyway, but I haven't had to worry about that this year, which is wonderful. Well, we are, let me get the right verse. We're at verse 34. I'll start with verse 32, but we're at 34. Now, I don't know if we're going to get done. The best place to end would be at the end of verse 42. But I don't know if we'll get there. And I don't want to keep you till 9:30 or 10 o'clock just so that we get there. So when we come back in March, I'll do some re-upping, and you'll all get plenty of information that we're getting back together. And but we'll just see where we go. I really would like to get it done, but I probably ought to start if we're going to get it done. So let me pray for us. Father, what a joy it is to be here, to study your word, and to see a side of your son's life that we can all relate to. And yet we know, Father, that there's so much in this passage that tells us of his obedient heart and his willingness to be your means of bringing all of us into a relationship with you. Thank you for this passage, and I pray that what we say tonight will honor you and that our hearts will be moved by the truth that we see in your word tonight. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, let me start. I'll just start at 32. I'll just read to the end. They went to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and Jesus said, "Sit here while I go and pray." And he took Peter, James, and John with him, and he became deeply troubled and distressed. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and watch with me." And he went on a little further and fell to the ground, and he prayed that if it were possible, the awful hour awaiting him might pass him by. Abba, Father, he cried out, everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me, yet I want your will to be done and not mine. Then he returned and found the disciples asleep, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation, for the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Then Jesus left them again and prayed the same prayer as before. And when he returned to them again, he found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open, and they didn't know what to say. When he returned to them the third time, he said, Go ahead and sleep. Have your rest. But no, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here. Now, when we read that Jesus had become deeply troubled and distressed, I mentioned to you that that's a really strong word. That it's a word that tells us that he was sorely troubled. That the primary word there is a word that is only found in this passage and in one other passage, and so it's not a very often used word because most people don't get to that level of distress or being upset. But needless to say, Jesus was, being upset was the prospect of what he knew was coming. And he knew about it because he'd spoken about it. He'd spoken clearly about he was going to have to go through, both in the anguish of the actual physical stuff that was going to be going on, but just the general tenor of what this all meant, and what he was going to have to take on to himself on behalf of others, and the relationship that he was going to lose with his Father, and all of those things. So you've got all of this stuff going on within him. And Jesus, when he speaks to the three disciples about it, before he prays, he says, my soul is deeply grieved unto death. It's just crushed with grief. That's okay to say that, to the point of death. I mean, think about that Jesus is actually saying, and in the Old Testament, this statement is actually a passage is a statement that echoes a number of Old Testament passages. I've got a few, and I don't know if you've got any of those, Jeff, but did you get any of those? It's the one like Psalms 42:5 or Psalms 42:11. These are all passages where the psalmists say, I'd rather die than have happen to me what's going on. Now think about how deeply grieved, I suppose that Jesus is. Jonah actually says it. Jonah says it when he sees that Nineveh has repented. He says, I'm so upset about it. Yeah, there it is. He says, God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry because the plant died? And he said, yes, even angry enough to die. This is, now this one is somewhat ironic, but the one with Jesus, there's nothing ironic about Jesus being so miserable in his heart that he would rather die. Actually, the word about how upset he is, it's paralupus rather, deeply grieved. It is the word, I might have told you this before, in the Septuagint, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that is used to talk about Cain's mental state right before he killed his brother, Abel. Like, yeah, there they are. Let's see it. Okay, that must be Cain. Oh, no, that's God. That's Abel. That's Cain. That's Abel, yeah. Steel engraving of Cain killing Abel, punished by God. Okay, 1870. But that was his mind. They're saying that that the word they chose to say what his mental state was when he killed his brother is the same word in the New Testament that they used to talk about Jesus saying that he is crushed and grieved to the point of death. That's pretty strong. Jesus was showing a human side. This is a really strong human side at its fullest at this moment. And he knows what's coming. And I was also thinking about this. He knows what's coming both for himself and for his disciples. And he doesn't want any of it. I mean, and we'll talk about what it is for him. But what he didn't want was he didn't want for the disciples to have to go through what they were about to go through. He didn't want that either. He didn't want any of that. And, I mean, we all know the end of the story. And he had a great sense of the end of the story, but he had to trust his Father in that. He had to trust his Father as he went through all this, that his Father would bring him back through the power of the Spirit to life. And, I mean, his next words say that he wanted his disciples to be with him both physically and in some way spiritually as he struggled with this coming fate when he says, "Stay here and keep watch with me." Now, when he says that, "Stay here and keep watch with me," boy, do the scholars get worked up about what Jesus was actually saying in that moment, in that command to stay here and keep watch. Some say he's commanding his disciples to keep watch for Judas. You need to look out for the enemy. Watch out for the enemy, that they're coming. That I'm going to pray, but I want you guys to look out for them because they might be coming. Other people say that Jesus was simply saying, "Stay awake while I pray." Keep watch can simply mean, because that's a common phrase in their world about what shepherds did through the night or what soldiers did on their moments when they were on the night watching and things like that. We still use that term for a watchman, and the deal is just to stay awake. And as I've talked about before, the expectation on Passover night is everybody stays awake all night. And so there would be, some people say, well, he was just saying, I want you to stay awake while I pray. Like, that's all. That's all I really want you to do. Just stay awake. And other people say that this was, and I laugh at this, but I've been thinking about this a lot, how some people say this is an eschatological term, that Jesus has suddenly gone from the moment and he's saying, stay awake and keep watch, like that parable that we read in chapter 13 where, the guys are supposed to stay awake because their owner of the property is going to come back, and it's a picture of Christ's return, the coming and all that. And I just got to be honest. I mean, Raymond Brown, I don't know if you guys know Raymond Brown. He's a well-known scholar. And you have to go, yeah, I respect you. And he has a book actually called The Death of the Messiah. And it's a massive work on what's happening all through the story of the Passion. It's considered a classic. But I just think he's wrong here. I'm just going to put it out there. I can't imagine that in the moment when Jesus said to them, stay here and keep watch while I pray. I can't imagine that Jesus was thinking eschatologically all of a sudden. He was suddenly thinking about his second return. I mean, he was probably, in my mind, he's not thinking about that at all. He's thinking about the end of his first coming, not his second coming. And the next thing is that I don't think for a minute that he was saying to them, watch out for Judas. I don't think that was it. I think this is Jesus at his most human point, where he is going to go through some suffering. He's about to pray. He's about to ask his Father for something that he is pretty sure probably is not going to get. He knows what's happening out there with Judas, and he just wanted some people who he loved and who loved him to be with him and to be present. Yeah, and prayer is out loud. And so they would be present to hear him praying. And so I just think that's what it is. But, I mean, if you happen to pick up Raymond Brown, The Death of the Messiah, he will not say that. He will say that this was an eschatological moment where Jesus suddenly shifted gears and went into it. Now, you all need to keep watch because I'm coming back later. And I don't get it anyway. But anyway, let me see. My notes will tell you all about that. It's right here where Mark says in verse 35, where Mark tells us that he went a little distance. That small distance is the actual Greek. It's and going forward a little. That's what it says. And going forward a little is the literal Greek. Now, at that small distance from Peter, James, and John, in my thinking, they're like here. And by virtue of that language, I think he's only like from there to here. Now, the stone's throw thing in John, I believe, is more about the distance of the other disciples. But when Jesus is like that far away and he's standing, well, he falls on the ground and prays. But his out loud praying could be heard by them. I mean, they don't have traffic noise and they don't have, nobody's playing a radio, there's nothing like that. And so it's like, it could probably easily be heard. Again, and I'm just going to say this, did you notice how this is worded? If you have a red letter Bible, do any of you have red letter Bibles? It goes in dark letters. He went a little further, fell to the ground. Now, by the way, I just want to say this. That word is to fall. It's the prostrate position. This is, and I told you this last week, I know, but praying was done standing up, mostly like this, except in moments of great emotional stress, when you're really, really desperate. Then you fall down, you pray down on the ground. And Jesus is in this position because he's in a terrible amount of emotional distress. Now, I want to say one thing about this. There is not a chance that the early church would have made up the fact that Jesus was praying in that way. Jesus is the hero of the story. Jesus is the one who wins. Heroes never, particularly in ancient literature, are shown to be weak at any point. The whole thing of somebody being worthy of being written about, being a hero in ancient writing, is that their character is consistent from front to back. The purpose of writing about somebody, we don't do this, but the purpose of writing about somebody in the ancient world was to give us all a template of a life that is worth emulating. When you're done reading about a famous person, you know why you read it, because you've learned about how to live. They're not going to make up the fact that right before he does the great thing that he does, he's going to be weak in the sense that he's praying on his face that he doesn't have to do this heroic thing. Does that make sense? That makes sense. So the church is not going to make this up. The other thing is this. That particular part of the passage, did you notice, is not quoting Jesus. The narrator is telling us what he'd said. That means either that they heard him, and then Peter told Mark that that's what he said, or later Jesus told them what he did, because he spent 40 days, off and on 40 days between the resurrection and his ascension with the disciples, talking to them about everything. And I'm certain that they had an opportunity to hear about it. I don't think there's any chance that we need to go, oh, they just made this up. And because they're not trying to, they're not quoting him because he didn't exactly say this. They're just saying what the tenor of it was. And I think that's important. I just think it's important that we know that this is the way that people start to criticize a text. They'll go, those guys are too far away. They didn't know what he was talking about. They couldn't hear him. They just made this up. And you hear that. You read that when people are critical. said, and he prayed if it were possible not that this awful hour, that is not in the Greek. It's just this hour. The NLT translators are right. They're right. Hour is used frequently in the Bible. It's really strong in Daniel, the hour. And we see it often in the New Testament. And that term is a way to speak of an event, event mostly, or a space of time that makes great change in people's lives. This hour. And by the way, they didn't have 60 minutes. They didn't have that kind of the day was not divided into those kinds of, they used that phrase, but they didn't have the same kind of time concepts. This word, hour, it's hora in the Greek, and it's a word that means a space of specific time. And when it's used here, it stands for something, now some people go, Jesus asked that this hour might pass him by. And they go, well, he's just worried about the next hour with Judas betraying him and the disciples all leaving. I don't think so. I think Judas betraying him and the disciples leaving is a part of the awful hour that he doesn't want to have to go through, which includes that and then the arrest and the trial and the crucifixion, the scourging, and then the crucifixion and death. That's the awful hour. That's what he's praying that it might pass him by. The reason he's praying this is because he's probably thinking, now, Father, isn't there some other way we can figure out to make this work? I mean, do we have to do it this way? I'm just getting started here. And yet, that's what he asked. Now, I certainly don't have any way to know at all what it's like to have knowledge of what's actually coming like this and know that it's tremendously important that I do it. I mean, remember, he's a human being. He's a guy. I mean, can you imagine what it's like to think like that? And I can see why he didn't go to the cross. In fact, if he'd have gone to the cross as a hero, if he'd have stood up and he said, take me, just bring it on. And I don't care what happens. That didn't hurt. If that was the story that we had, it would be no way to fully relate to his humanity. He would be far more a made-up character if he was that kind of a character. I'm just glad we get the real story of his life. Now, the next sentence, actually we're getting through this. This is good. Now we get quotes from him. Abba, Father, he cried out, everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. And I just want to say this. How many of you have heard, just 1 second, that's 36. That Abba means daddy. You heard that? I hate to break it to you. It doesn't. Abba is an Aramaic word. It is one of the first words that children would say when they were little. It's an exclamation of a child, like when they're first babbling something. The word was used mostly as a respectful word of intimacy that a grown son would use for a father in a highly patriarchal family. I don't know how it became this word that people said is daddy, because I mean, if you listen to new kids that are first starting to talk, they kind of say this word anyway. It is a familiar term, but it was never used like daddy. Now, I don't want to, it's okay, I suppose. Here's the deal. Are we able to refer or speak to God now in a tone that's endearing? Like, does he want us to relate to him in an endearing way? Yes. But just to go to the diminutive immediately as if that's the way we're supposed to address the God of the universe is a bit much. Jennifer and I had a really dear man who was, when we lived in Evansville, he was really the spiritual father of the spiritual family that we lived in. And I loved him. My life is emptier because of his passing, he and his wife's passing. And I don't have a bad thing to say about him, but he prayed daddy all the time. And it just like, come on. But I know that he did it out of the rightness of his heart. He'd just been informed incorrectly. It's like the same thing like when he would always bring up to me the fact that when Jesus restores Peter, he said love with 3 different words, and that we're supposed to really get in. The Greek says this in 3 different words. I just want to say, and it just always just drove me nuts because I didn't want to correct him, but I loved him too much. He was just, he had 2 Greek words, and I was like, come on, Doc. His name was Doc. I loved him, but the daddy thing, I just, I always knew if we were going to pray together, he'd go, Daddy? Anyway, it's fine. He's with the Lord, and he's probably calling him Daddy. So what we do know is this word is never used any place in Jewish literature to speak of God. Not ever. And even Jesus' use of my Father, when he said my Father, with the ownership thing on it, that was considered blasphemy. And I'm going to preach on that this week. That's what Son of God, the claim of Jesus to be the Son of God, and the statement that he made it over and over and over by calling God my Father. And that's what gets him killed. And Jesus is being, I would say that in this moment, the use of the term Abba, which is a highly respectful term that is used by a son to a father who is really in charge, which is what it really comes down to in the Aramaic. That particular relationship between him is an intimacy that Jesus clearly wants to enter right into, right at this moment with God. He wants to use, with his Father, he wants to say first, Abba, which is personal, and then Father, which is a claim of his sonship. And it's like, I think he was just distraught emotionally to the point where he used the most familiar language he could possibly use. The other thing is that I'm 100% confident that this was heard by the other guys, because they would never put that word in Jesus' mouth for his Father unless they heard it. It's just too far-fetched to make it up. So anyway, it is interesting though, and you guys probably know this, but even though it's a word that is used for intimacy that no one would ever use, it then shows up twice in the writings of Paul where it says, because of Christ we can call him there. So you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you received God's Spirit when he adopted you as his own children. Now we call him what? Abba, Father. And because we are his children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, prompting us to call out what? Abba, Father. Same thing. Now this is to remind us of what Jesus called out when he was in his great moments of distress in his prayer. He called out, Abba, Father. And It would have been inappropriate for it. It's inappropriate for anybody in their culture who is not the son of the father to use that term for anybody else. I would have never used that for somebody else, And this is what Jesus has done for us. He's brought us into the family. Abba, Father. And then he says something that is both true, and it is also a sign that he's not about to be disrespectful. He says, everything is possible for you. It is true. And so what he's saying is like, you can do whatever you want. You can make this work without going through this. But I'm just making sure that you know that I'm saying, yeah, this is all possible. Whatever you want to do, you can do it. He's hedging this a little bit because what he's going to do is he's going to get right around to the fact that the big thing, which is so hard for us to do, which is to say, not my will, but yours. And in so many practical ways. He says, please take this cup from me. He doesn't say of suffering. The suffering, when the NLT translated cup of suffering, they're making a definitive statement about what they believe the cup is. The cup is always used in the Old Testament as a sign of judgment and of wrath, the wrath of God. It's the cup of, and we talked about it last week when you talked to me about Psalms. It's very clear in that one. It's Psalm 75:8. Yeah. That's the cup of judgment that the wicked have to drink. There's also the cup of wrath that God says he's going to make other people speak or drink. Scholars just go on and on about what the cup is. And I've got a bunch of lists. I've got a list in here. But at the bottom end of it, it all comes down to this. The cup that and the fact that they put of suffering in there, that changes it for all of us. Because what it does is it makes us think about the things he's about to go through with relationship to the passion, like the scourging and the crucifixion and the carrying of his cross, that kind of physical suffering. No, the thing that he doesn't want to have to do is he doesn't want to go through the judgment that comes upon him for the sins that have been committed by others that he's innocent of. He doesn't want to have to go through the distance that he's going to have with his Father when that cup comes to him, the wrath of God for the sins of mankind, and he didn't do anything, and he has to bear that cup. That's what he doesn't want to go through. I mean, what is it that says somewhere, Paul says, and I mean, somebody might stand up for a good man, but who wants to have to give their life for somebody that's guilty? That kind of a thing. Who wants to do that? Jesus has been in what? Perfect relationship with his Father for his entire life. He has never done anything that demands that God bring his wrath upon him or his judgment for the terrible things that he's done. There's none of this. Jesus was never obligated in any manner to do anything to confess his personal sin before God to restore the relationship. All of the sacrificial processes in the system of that time were about getting it right with God. Jesus didn't have to do any of that, and yet he knows that he's going to have to drink the full cup of the judgment of God for everybody all at once. And he's going to be separated from his Father in a way that he just doesn't want to have anything to do with. This is a powerful moment. Please, he's asking, please take this cup, if it is possible, take it from me. I don't have any way to relate to that. I don't have a moment in my life when I can think that somebody did this, I didn't have anything to do with it, And yet I'm going to take all the blame and the punishment for it. And I'm going to take everything on me that comes with the results of that thing they did. We call that straight up injustice when that happens in the world. When an innocent person is proclaimed guilty of something they didn't do, we all get worked up about it. And yet Jesus says what then? He goes, yet, he says, not my, well, I'm going to look right at the Greek. But not what I love. I mean, this is an interesting word. It uses the word thelu here. And I got to tell you, and when I took Greek, I had a wonderful aunt who was just about the most, I would say, close to Jesus woman you could possibly have met. She was just this precious saint, and her name was Thelma. And I knew that, and that's how I remembered the word thelu, because thelu means will or wish, your wish. And I knew that my Aunt Thelma just wanted her wish was to always do the will of God. And that's how I remember it. And every time I see this word in the Greek, I remember my Aunt Thelma and how precious she was. And he goes, because the word can mean, and they're two concepts. A wish and your will are two completely different things, really. A wish is something that you just would like to have. You know, I just wish I got a pony for Christmas. But if your will is you're going to get a pony for Christmas, then there you have a different attitude about it, you know? And so and the word can be either. And I think there's something of both in this. He says, yet I want what? And his wish for the world is what? That mankind has a way to get back to relationship with God. And God's will is that something has to happen so that wish will become. And I just love that. That's the word. It says, yet I want your will to be done, not mine. Now, we say that all the time. I do. You know, I just want God's will. I hear this all the time. I just want God's will. But the fastest way for people to lose faith is when they don't get their will, and what seems to be the will of God seems to be exactly the opposite of what they wanted. The thing is this, that our will, our own wishes or our own desires, our own will, is something that we carry at the forefront of our minds, and God's will shows itself as it works itself out through circumstances. And so they're not really running on the same track. But you often, I know for me, how often have you thought, this is what I really want, and you don't get it, and then you go, ugh, and then life goes on, and suddenly you look back and you go, look at what God brought to me, and if I'd have gotten that, everything would have been terrible. Seriously. You know, it's like God had something else in mind, and it works itself out through circumstances. And that's just a hard thing to face, because we are so adept at deciding we know what God really needs to have happen in his world for us and through us. And, you know, I'll tell you this quick story. This is really personal. But when I was going to go to seminary, Jennifer and I were going to sell a house, invest the money from the house and the money from other stuff. We were going to put it all together, and we were going to move to Chicago, and we were going to do this on our own and make it all happen. And we'd figured it out. And my will was to do it that way so that I wouldn't be obligated to anybody. That was where my heart was. I wanted to do this, but I didn't want to be obligated to anybody in the end. That just didn't happen. One day, I don't know if you remember this, but if you were around, but Don Hopper got up in front of the church and said, we want to help Tim go to seminary, and if anybody wants to help, well, just send us a check. And in a week, they raised $250,000. God had a will, and it was that I be what? Humbled in the moment, that I knew I was being supported by a community that didn't even care whether I came back to be a pastor here. They wanted me to be a pastor. I wanted to do it on my own, and I didn't. And then the next thing I know, it's like I don't have to sell my house, and I don't have to move, and I don't have debt at the end, and I don't have any of this, and it's all happened in a week. And you talk about humbling, because I'd been trying to plan it for a long time, and then all of a sudden God works with a different kind of will. And I don't know the list of people who helped, but all I know is they probably have a greater joy about the fact that I'm a pastor at Grace than I do. So who knows? You know, that was a huge learning moment for me. Anyway, he said it and he meant it. And we know he meant it because he wanted the cup to pass from him, and he drank the cup completely when it came time for it. Well, we need to take a break. I think we're going to get through with the passage, so where are we? We might not. Okay. Let's just take 5. Let's make it real 5. No questions from you, Fran. Oh, yeah, it's original. Are we ready? Is everybody back?
Okay, folks.
Okay, we ready? Okay, let me get going here. I want to see if we can get done. When it says, verse 37, it says, and he returned and found the disciples asleep. I just want you to know that in the Greek, that's really says, and he comes and finds them sleeping. It's more like that. That's the statement. It's far more direct. And my thinking in this coming, and it's actually the word coming, he comes, or I think it might actually even be in the past tense. He came and found it. And I'm thinking it's more of a turning around to find them sleeping. It's not a long walk. And because I don't think he was that far from them to begin with. Now, one thing we don't know is we don't know how long of a time it goes between his praying and then he's done praying and then him going back to the disciples. We don't know how long of a time it is. Our minds, and the way it's always portrayed in the movies and stuff, it's like it's immediate. It's immediate, but I don't know. It's interesting that Jesus directs. Did you notice that he directs whom immediately? He says to Peter. And who's the person who's the source of this material? It's Peter. And Jesus does not call him Peter. He calls him by his real name. He calls him Simon. Peter's his nickname. Nobody called him Peter outside of the group of disciples until later. And he calls him Simon. He says, are you asleep? Let me make sure that... Finds them sleeping. And he says, Simon, sleepest thou? Are you asleep? Could you not wait 1 hour? Or could you not 1 hour watch, is what he says. Could you not watch 1 hour? Now, again, we talked about this before. They had good reason to be sleepy. It was late. It's probably 11 or 12 at night, maybe later. Full belly. A lot of hiking. They're just tired. But again, and I'll go back to this, the expectation, though, was that they stay awake. And so now what they did when they stayed awake, though, on Passover night was they were supposed to have long conversations as families about the goodness of God. They were supposed to talk about, because Passover represented the faithfulness of God, and Passover represented God's protection and care and all these good things. There's nothing in the Passover that's negative because it's all positive about God taking care of us when they celebrate the Passover. And so they're supposed to be, it's a highly Thanksgiving kind of celebration. And so that's what they talk about together. Jesus doesn't have them talking, though. They're not keeping each other awake in talking to one another. They're being quiet and they fall asleep. And I understand that. But Jesus seems to be surprised that they're asleep. He seems to be surprised. I think these two questions are somewhat rhetorical. I don't think he expected Peter to respond and say, no, I couldn't, and I ate too much. I don't think he was expecting anything like that. We have to remember, too, that Jesus knew what was actually coming in the next few minutes. They did not. They did not know. Jesus has told them that this terrible thing is coming eventually, but he's never said it's happening now. He will, but he hasn't yet. He hasn't yet. And he says to him, keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation. Now, and then he says, for the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard sermons where they took that statement out of context and just start talking about it in the raw. Jesus is talking about a specific moment here. He's talking about the fact that they need to what? Stay awake and to pray. Why? Because that's what he's doing too. He wants them to stay awake and to pray. And he says that you won't what? Give in to temptation. What would be the temptation in the moment? Well, I think in Jesus' mind, the temptation for them is going to be to not trust God and to desert him, to protect themselves. That the temptation will be to go back on their vows to him, to stand with him, and to never leave him, and all that other stuff that they've just, they've all just said this. And the temptation is going to be exactly that. And I think that's what he wants them to pray about. And then when he says that the spirit is willing, but the body is weak, I cannot tell you how many times I have heard people talk about the fact that this is a Jesus going existential on us. That he's going philosophical about the nature of our being, that we have a spirit and a body. We have two parts to us. That there is this weak body, and the word there for weak is not just weak, it's like really stronger. I have the broader definition. It means to be feeble or impotent. It's also a word, the word that he used there is also a word that when somebody was really sick, they used that word. Yeah, it's a strong word. It's a strong word for what the body is. But Jesus was not talking about the fact that how we're built. He wasn't thinking about that at the moment. He was thinking about the fact that they had what? In their spirits, they were never going to leave him. They were going to stand with him. And he knows that that's really great to say, but when push comes to shove, you're not going to be able to do it. That you're going to respond what? Viscerally. You're going to run and that kind of thing. And so he's saying, pray that you don't do this. Pray that you don't do this. Why? Because they're not going to want to have to live with themselves when the day comes when it's all over and they realize that they went back on their vow and they abandoned him in this moment. I don't think for a minute that Jesus said, now it is true that we need to stay awake and be aware of what's going on. And we need to pray about things. And we need to pray that we won't give in to temptation. Yeah, I get that. But yeah, that's true in like a big concept. And it is true that oftentimes our spirits are really willing to do something, and yet when we get right into the mix of the stuff, we give in because we're what? But in the word body, the flesh, it's the word sarx, which is for body, but it's just a general term for the humanity of us. And I'm right on that, aren't I? I am. There it is, sarx. See, because the spirit is willing or eager or happy about it. That prothumon up there, it's a word that means it really wants to do this. But the flesh is sick. Now, that is true about us. But I don't think Jesus went philosophical all of a sudden here. And I guess it's okay. This is just one thing that I have trouble with. We can find plenty of text that talks about the fact that humanity is given to that which is wrong, even though they know what is right and would rather do it. We can find plenty of texts about that. We don't need to lift this one out as if Jesus has made some sort of big statement about, again, back to the existential nature of the universe. I'm always worried about times when we take something out of the scripture to make another point. And it may be true, but the scripture didn't have anything to do with that at the beginning. Jesus is just talking to them about the fact, I need you to pray with me, and you need to pray for yourself, because what's coming is way bigger than you understand. And I'm just here to tell you that I am very confident. If I'd have been there on that night and those soldiers were coming to get Jesus, and even if I'd have told him I'm not going anywhere, I'd have probably run for my life. It is true that the spirit is willing and the flesh is weak, but it's not an excuse. It's never an excuse. We can never say, I had an odd moment with a granddaughter recently when she did something, and I asked her why she did that, and she said, "The devil made me do it." I do not know what they're teaching her in Sunday school in Chicago, but I was a bit taken aback by that because the devil made her do that. We can't say the devil made me do that any more than we can also say, well, I couldn't help myself because my flesh is weak. No excuse there. That's not an excuse. Anyway, on we go. Now, Jesus, when he said, couldn't you watch with me for an hour? I just wanted you to know this, that when he says, so keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation, that's all in the plural. So he says, Peter, can't you do this? And then he starts talking to the three of them. So he's not like picking on Peter there when he's doing it. And it goes on, then Jesus left them again and prayed the same prayer as before. We don't hear the prayer. Nothing. We just have to assume that he's still asking the same thing of his Father. Now, once again, I just want to say this one more time. There is no possibility that the early church made this up to balance out. This is what people say. Well, Peter's going to deny him 3 times. And so Jesus has to have a balance thing with Peter. This is a literary balancing thing for the narrative. And that they made this up so that Jesus has 3 moments of weakness and Peter has 3 moments of weakness. And then we have 3 moments of the return of Peter to the love of Jesus later when that all happens in the Gospel of John. And they say this, and you know what? That's just goofy. There is no chance that the early church is going to make Jesus pray 3 times, something that makes him look afraid, unless he prayed 3 times because he was afraid. Nobody's hero prays 3 times that he can get out of something. Nobody's hero. They don't even pray 1 time. So, but he goes and we don't get the same. We're not told what he says, other than it was the same thing. We just assume it was, and we don't know how long he prayed it, and we don't know how long he waited. It's an interesting passage here because most of the time, let me make sure I'm right on this. Let me just look real quickly. No, I was about to tell you something that's not true. This passage is connected with ands all the time through it. So this is a movement so that we see this all as one space. There's a point later where the ands stop, and that's. I hope we get there. We got 10 minutes. Can we do this for like 10 more minutes? He finds them sleeping again, and I love this. This is a human statement, for they couldn't keep their eyes open. I get that. I'll never forget when I was a kid. Let me just wait. I want to look at the Greek right here. It just says their eyes had become heavy is what it literally says. And that makes sense to me. I was in church as a kid, and I must have been really tired because I fell asleep early in the service. And when I woke up, the pastor was in the pulpit, and he was talking, and he had his head up like this, and he was just talking away. And the whole choir behind him, they were all like this. And I thought, this must be the most boring sermon in the world. And then I realized he was praying. And they are all praying. The whole choir was praying, you know. There I was thinking, man, their eyes must be really heavy. Anyway, it was normal. They're what? They're human beings. Now, this is an exact quote from the Transfiguration, and they didn't know what to say. And when they were on the Mount of Transfiguration, and they saw what was going on, and then they didn't know what to say, so Peter starts going, let's build 3 shelters here, and we can, one for all of you, and he just goes crazy saying stupid stuff, and it's the exact same thing, and they didn't know what to say. Now, in this case, the 3 of them have learned their lesson. If they don't know what to say, don't say anything. Just be quiet. Now, they're a bit sleepy, But they've been caught asleep for a second time, and they say nothing. Why? Because they're embarrassed. Jesus said he only told them to do two things. Stay awake and pray. Stay awake and pray. And they weren't doing either one. They weren't doing either one. Okay, let's put that. We're going to get this. They're going to do this here. Now they do it a third time. Third time. It just says he came back. He came again to them a third time. Doesn't say that they were sleeping. It doesn't say anything. But he says this to them. Now this next passage where it says, go ahead and sleep, have your rest, but no, the time has come, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let's be going, look, my betrayer is here. That set of sentences is really difficult in the Greek. And I just want to be straight about it. There's something in this. Let me get to the notes and he says, the Greek actually says, you sleep now and rest. So he says, you sleep now and rest. Now, there's a whole bunch of discussion about what this actually means. Why did Jesus say this? Some people say that he was done praying. He'd already given over his heart to the will of God because he hadn't sensed that this was going to change. And he knew what was coming was terrible. And so he just said, go ahead and sleep, guys. Because what's coming, you need a little bit. You need some rest before this happens. Like Jesus just being kind to them. And some people say that Jesus, when he came back the second time or third time, he's not saying, go ahead and sleep, have your rest. He's saying, go ahead, sleep, have your rest. Like he's furious that they've not been awake and sleeping. Like he's mad about it, and he's just done with it. And other people say it has it's said with a tone of resignation, like, oh, go ahead and sleep, have your rest. Like, I'm alone in this now. I'm really alone in this. So you might as well just sleep because I know what's coming. And so I'm alone. So you have three possibilities. And it's all in the way you say it. Because the language itself does not tell us at all what his intention was in this. And all three are possible. And now we might come down at some place and say, we think this is more probable than this one or that one. Because is it possible that Jesus knows that they need to get a little bit of sleep before? Because we don't have any. Here's another thing. This whole section doesn't have the chi connections. So that's like there's no time. Because chi is a word that's used and. Because I don't know if you know this, but almost all Hebrew and much of Greek, every sentence begins with and. Why? Because it's connecting them all the time. It just keeps them moving by and, So I went to the store, and then I got in my car, and then I drove over to Glendale, and when I got to Glendale, I went into the Home Depot, and so it's like making it one big thing. No matter what's going on, we connect it with this, and now we've stopped here. And he says, go ahead and have your rest. It's something new is going on, and we don't know what his tone is. And this is part of the problem. I'm sure that when Peter said it to them when he's teaching it, Jesus came back and he found us asleep. And I was sort of half asleep, and he said, go ahead and have your rest. Or he says, I was half asleep and Jesus came back and we were sleeping again, and he goes, go ahead, have your rest. I mean, you see what I'm saying? We don't know. Now, there may be some truth in all of it, but I don't know. I would have loved to know what he was actually saying. But then it says but no here. And I just want you to know that that is a really, really rough way to say but no. And plus, it's not connected to the go ahead and have your rest with an and. So we don't know how. The word here it's apexe. Apexe. And it's there it is. See where it stops and have your rest is there, the and. Now, and then see that dot between that word and the apexe, and the dot between the next section. The hour has come is what it says. Behold. And then, well, anyway, you see how they have those dots there around apexe? Those are not in the text. They added that so that we would see that word's standing on its own. It's a really unusual word, and it has a meaning like this, that it is sufficient or enough of this, but it's actually a financial term that literally meant that the debt that was owed or the money that was needed to settle an account has been done, paid. And so, like, people go, okay, what is Jesus talking about when first he says, go ahead and have your sleep, get some rest, and then he says this one word. And they translated it, but no. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with but no. He's making some kind of statement like, well, it could be like he could be saying, since it means like that's sufficient, he could be saying, you've slept enough, so it's time to get up. Or he could have been meaning, that's enough. This is enough. I've rebuked you enough times, so I'm not going to rebuke you anymore. I told you 3 times you weren't doing the right thing, and I'm done. That's enough. It's a financial term. Some people say, no, what he's saying is that Judas had been paid, and he's probably on his way. The debt had been paid to him for the work he was going to do. Or Jesus could have been just using a common way that they did in their world to say, well, we've come to the end of something, and now we're moving on to something new. We don't know. We don't know what Jesus actually. This is a very interesting moment in the text. Because what it does is it's a word, it's an exclamation which ends the front end and begins the actual aspects of the passion, because what he says next is, get up. Can you put that next text up for me? Oh, yeah, good. There they are. Wow, are you good or what, Jeff? See, one was they'd slept enough. They needed that he's done rebuking them for them sleeping. That Judas was paid and probably on the way, and that we've come to the end of all this stuff and something is about to happen. That word could mean any of that. And however you come down on it, it really changes the story. But we don't know. It's just an interesting Greek word. Clearly, the NLT guys, they translated it, but no, as in, oh, you can sleep, but no, here they come. We don't know that at all. We don't know how much time it is. Then it says, the Son of Man, but no, the time is, yeah, that's what they translated. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. I just want to say a couple of things about that. I was going to preach on the Son of Man, so you don't want me to start talking about it because I know way too much about that phrase. But you know, it's interesting that Jesus uses that term. He goes into the third person to talk about himself right here at this moment. He actually says, behold. Is this where he says, behold, the Son of Man is?
No, he says it when he talks about Judas. The Son of Man, he is identifying with two things here. And I'll just be really quick about this. Ezekiel was called the Son of Man 93 times by God in the book of Ezekiel. And every time it's to remind Ezekiel that he's not God and that he's just a guy and that he's being told to do things that represent God and speak for God, but that he is a human being whose job it is to do whatever kind of action is necessary to get people to know what God wants from them. Then Daniel talks about the Son of Man as being, well, he's like the Son of Man, who is somebody who is a man who comes with the power of heaven behind him, and God puts him on the throne and gives him all kinds of authority and power and recognition. Also, in the book of Enoch, it talks about the Son of Man and almost all of their concepts in the first century about the Son of Man, who this Son of Man is that Daniel talks about. Because, and I just have to say this, the Son of Man in Ezekiel is always in Hebrew. The Son of Man in Daniel is always in Aramaic. And the people of Jesus' day spoke Aramaic. And so they would relate directly more to the one that's the one who God is sending and giving power to than the one who's the Hebrew Son of Man. But Enoch enlarges in the work of Enoch. It talks about the Son of Man at a bigger level where everybody had become enamored with that phrase because they thought it was another way to talk about the Messiah, the man who was going to do God's work. And that's who Jesus is. Jesus is the man who speaks God's word and does these actions which show the people what God wants from them. He's also the man who has been given the power and authority, and he is the one who is the Messiah, as they spoke about in Enoch. He is that one, and he refers to himself that way because when the Jews heard the term Son of Man, they got hope in their souls because they thought that the Messiah was coming to overthrow Rome. And Jesus uses that term to identify himself with all the biblical stuff, but also to negate their thoughts of how he was going to act. And at this very moment, when he's about to go to the cross, he's still referring to himself in that way because he wants to give us all what? Hope that comes from the term, because hope was embedded in it whenever it was spoken within the Jewish world at the time. Does this make sense? Okay, I'm almost done here. And he says, betrayed into the hands of sinners. The betrayed word means handed over. We've heard this before, but it's interesting that he says into the hands of sinners. Now we know that Judas was a sinner when he did. In fact, this is the first time that he's really speaking about what these people's actions, what Judas's actions are. We know Judas was a sinner. We know that the chief priests and the scribes who sent the mob were sinners, but I don't know that they were with them. There is some question about whether, and I just want to be sure about this, that you know this, that there's some question about whether the people who went to get Jesus knew what they were doing. They were just working, they're doing their job to go get Jesus. Now the word here, do you have it up for the Greek? You don't have that? Okay, I'll have it in my notes. But the word here for the sinners, it's apartoloi is a plural. Is that what it is? No, it's amartoloi, isn't it? It's amartoloi. Yeah, it is, amartoloi. It doesn't really matter. It's a word that the Jews generally used to speak of Gentiles. Okay? They just referred to them. The word means sin. Amartia means to miss the mark, or we would say to sin. And hamartia is, they took that word and they turned it into a noun, hamartoloi, as a general slam on Gentiles. It'd be just like if we called like a whole race of people the thises. You know, everybody from all Dutch are lazy. The Dutch are just lazy. You know, and so we just call them the lazies. And they aren't. I just made that up because it's kind of easy to pick on the Dutch. You know? But they call them the sinners, and it was a word for the Gentiles. And so there's some people that say The Jews didn't have anything to do with crucifying Jesus. Even the people who came to get him on the night he was betrayed were Romans, because this is a word that they used for the Roman soldiers because they were Gentiles. There's no proof that that is true. That there is proof that the soldiers were part of the temple guard. They were Jews. This is not to blame the Jews. And the Jews who went to get him, they probably didn't know Jesus from Grogan's goat. They were probably just out there doing their job. But Judas was a sinner. The chief priests and the scribes, they were sinners. And Jesus is saying, this action is something that's really missing the mark here. This is terrible. And then he goes, let's get up and be going. And he's not saying, let's get up and run away, because Jesus had no intention of running away. He went towards the people who were after him. Can you imagine? Think they're on the top of this hill and they're all kind of sleeping. It's pitch dark, and out in the distance they see what? A crowd coming with torches and swords and clubs. And they hear it coming. That's what they see. And he says, look, my betrayer is here. And that's why, the reason he says that is, and it's singular, the betrayer, my betrayer, the one who is going to betray me. And this is the first moment where Jesus admits to the group, because he said earlier, one of you is going to what? Betray me. But he never said, and it's you. He said to the guy, he said to Judas, go do what you need to do. But he never said, hey, everybody, this is the guy. You know, he's been stealing from us, and he's also going to betray me. He doesn't do that. But right here, he goes, my betrayer is here. We know who it is. We know that it's Judas. And this is the moment where it all shifts. Once we've seen nothing has happened yet other than Jesus has been let down, and he's sad, and he's wanting this to go away. But now when he says, let's be going, he means into it. He's given over completely everything to his Father's will. Let me just read this last sentence if I can. It says, there's a strong sense of acceptance of what is coming in Jesus' words here. He wants his disciples up and awake for this moment, but not so that they can defend him against this coming crowd. He wants them to witness his resignation to live out the will of his Father in this terrible moment. And so will now begin the horrors of the passion of the Christ, horrors that he will willingly accept because it is his Father's will that no sinners would perish but have the opportunity to have eternal life. That's exactly he is going to this moment, which ends on the cross, for the very people who came to kill him. We got to remember that, because what? Jesus came to what? To rescue sinners. And the word right here is the same exact word that we see over and over once Paul starts giving us the theology of what just happened. Jesus came to rescue sinners. I said it before, but I've thought about it a lot lately. Jesus will never ask us to do anything harder than wash the feet of Judas. And that's right here, because he did it right before Judas did this. So, okay, we did it. I kept you for 10 extra minutes. Thank you. Have a great Christmas. And I will see you on the 13th of March. I hope I see you all before then. If you see me in the building, say hey. Say hey. I'm easy to talk to. And on the 6th of January, if you think of me, remember, I'm trying to get kids to actually think following Jesus is important. So, okay, thanks, guys.